In this episode of Creative Christians, writer and author Deborah DeArmond joins me to discuss the finer points of writing.
If you feel in your heart and you know in your spirit, this is what God's asked me to do, then prepare. It's not always going to be fun. There's going to be a lot of times when you're going to need some encouragement, someone to help you see the strengths and not just all the stuff you don't like about the work that you've done. Stick with it.
That's writer Deborah DeArmond, today on Creative Christians. My name is Tim Ristow. I'm a creative, a filmmaker and writer. I'm also a Christian. Many of my friends are also Christian creatives, writers, filmmakers, actors, musicians, photographers, and artists. Who are these people, and how does their faith infuse their creativity? These are stories of creative Christians. And welcome to another episode of Creative Christians, the podcast series that explores Christian creatives, their talents, their faith, and what they're doing at the intersection of both. I'm your host, Tim Ristow. Thank you so much for listening. When I started the show about roughly 5 months ago, as of the date of this recording, one of the criteria I was using for which guests to have on the show was to only interview fellow creatives who I knew personally, that I had some past experience with to draw from. I figured that list of individuals would take me a while to go through. If after completing that list of guests, I found I still had some listeners to warrant my continuing on, then I'd start looking into other guests, people I didn't know personally. That was my plan at the outset. Well, with my guest today, I'm already going to break that initial rule. My guest today was actually a listener of Creative Christians first before becoming a guest today. She reached out to me after listening to the show, was kind enough to write a wonderful review, but I did not know her. We corresponded via email about her writing. I started reading her writing, and eventually we made an appointment to talk on the phone. I quickly discovered that she was not only a talented writer, but also a writing coach, editor, speaker, and a dedicated Christian. I decided that perhaps my guest rule was a bit confining. I was confining not only myself, but also my listeners. Perhaps I was also inadvertently trying to confine God. My guest today is the delightful Deborah DeArmond. She's a writer, an award-winning author, in fact. She is also a writing coach, editor, and speaker. She has written 6 books, over 200 articles, and is in her 10th year of writing a monthly column for Lifeway magazine. She was instrumental in developing a website for women in their 50s and beyond called My Purpose Now. Her books include Related by Chance, Family by Choice, I Choose You Today, and Don't Go to Bed Angry, Stay Up and Fight. All 3 books focus on relationship dynamics, communication, and conflict resolution. Her humorous devotional entitled Bumper Stickers Beatitudes was published in late 2019. Her newest releases, We May Be Done, But We're Not Finished, Making the Rest of Your Life the Best of Your Life, and The Right Calling, Encouragement for the Writer's Heart, were released in 2021 and 2022. Deb's clients have described her as candid but kind and skilled at asking the questions that help guide others to discover their answers and solutions to success. Deb attended California State Polytechnic University and studied in the field of communications. She holds numerous professional certifications as a master facilitator trainer, including conflict resolution from the Center for Collaborative Solutions, Development Dimensions International, situational leadership, and several style personality profile assessments, including Strength Finders and DISC. Deb also holds a coaching certification for authors, speakers from AWSA, Advanced Writers and Speakers Association. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome author and writer Deborah DeArmond to Creative Christians. She also has the honor of being the first female guest on the show. Deb, welcome to the show.
Tim, thank you so much. That was an exhausting list. I have to go and take a nap.
Exactly.
When you look back over your life and you think, wow, God led me. He led me to all those places, all those opportunities. He is good. He is good.
Amen to that. I know it's funny that dimension of hindsight, of being able to actually look back when we get to go on with our day-to-day lives and everything's just running, and then we stop and look back and go, wow, God's done some things for me.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to have to ask this first. How did you discover my podcast? I mean, I think I'd only had, an episode or two going. I had just barely launched, a month or so prior. How did you actually seek me out and find me or discover me, stumble upon me?
In hindsight, I'm pretty sure it was the Lord, but I was looking for opportunities to share a little bit about what I do.
Right.
And I looked under Christian podcasts, and there are a plethora of them. Yeah. But so many of them hadn't recorded anything for months or years. They had done a few and then abandoned it. Right. Yours was new. I liked the pitch that I read on your website and decided to listen. Awesome. And fell in love with some of the guests that I listened to, but I really love your style.
Thank you.
You're a seeker. You're looking. You're curious, and I like that.
Oh, awesome! Well, thank you so much. That's great to hear. I love getting any feedback on the show, especially since it's still so new. But very kind of you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You've been guesting on some podcasts, and I believe you know some others too, or some friends maybe that have their own podcasts, things like that. Are there a lot of resources out there for Christian writers?
There are, and podcasting has really kind of exploded, to be honest. Yeah. I've got a very dear friend from the UK who lives in Texas, and she won for the best new podcast, Christian podcast, 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I know that when she went to that conference, it was well attended. She said 2 years later, it has blown up.
Wow.
And she said, there is a podcast for everybody if you're willing to find it. And she said, that's part of the problem, is being discovered.
Exactly. So, Deb, tell me a little bit about your background. Where were you born?
I was born in a little town called Fontana, California. My folks moved there from the Midwest, and I was a late in life baby, a surprise baby, my parents said. I had one sibling who was 16 years my senior, but by the time I was 2, he had gone away to college, and we really had very little in common until we were both adults, and then we were very, very close. My folks owned their own business, a shoe store, and I went from kindergarten through college in some respects with the same kids all of those years, and I loved it. It was great to be in that small town. It's where I met my husband. We were high school sweethearts. He was the person who led me to the Lord. I had grown up in church, and I knew all the stories, but I didn't know the storyteller. My mom had joined a Protestant church when they moved there. My dad was Jewish. I was dedicated in the synagogue, and I was christened in the Protestant church. Right. But that's where we attended, and I was taught so very much. But then I met this young man who began to ask me questions about my faith in Tim. Not only did I not know the answers, I didn't understand most of the questions. And he was patient. For 6 months, he shared the Lord with me, not pushing, asking me questions. Some of them made me angry that I didn't know the answer. Right. I had grown up there. Those people were part of my life. The youth group were my friends. And the night before graduation, sitting in a parked car, he looked at me and said, "You about ready to ask Christ into your heart?" Now, that's not what teenagers are usually doing in a parked car late at night, but that was my step into faith.
That is powerful. What happened from there with you and your faith?
Well, he went away to Bible college for a year. I went to Cal Poly in Pomona and began my studies. But that next year, he decided to stay in California for school. And we got engaged, and a year later, at the ripe age of 19, we were married. My brother had a fit. He said, "You're way too young. We've been married 47 years. I think it's a solid. I think we're good.
I think,
I think we're going to be fine.
It's going to work.
It's going to work." 3 sons and 3 wonderful daughters-in-law and 9 grandchildren, 8 of them boys.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I'll pray for
It's
you.
a noisy little group when we're all together. But the little girl is 4 and she's running the tribe. Trust
I bet
me.
she is. I bet she is.
She is.
Oh, that's awesome. So how did you get started in writing then? And how much of that started because of your faith, or was it just this desire to write in general?
It was not the desire to write in general. It never crossed my mind. As you shared in my introduction, I loved the work I did. I got to work with executives. I had the chance to work all over the world. It's on someone else's dime, working with helping managers become leaders because they really don't have much in common. And for 3 years, 3 people in my life began to tell me, I think you should be writing books. And I thought, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's never crossed. I'm an avid reader, but write? No, I'd written instructional materials for years. The first person was Ron. And I thought, well, he might figure that she talks a lot, and maybe if she writes some of the stuff down, it'll be quieter at home. And it hasn't actually worked out that way for him. The second person was my brother, who was a journalist. And I thought, well, what have you ever read of mine? And we were letter writers, not posting stuff back and forth. We didn't use the internet back then.
Yeah.
And I said, what on earth would I write? He said, I don't know. But he said, I know that if you wrote like you speak, I think people would listen to you. And I know that you have a message with your church stuff. And the third person was the aggravator and the agitator. Eve started to let me know she thought I should be writing. I dismissed it. And then she switched and her approach began, so what's the book going to be about? And how's the book coming along? And when will the book be done? And in sheer exasperation one afternoon, I said, Eve, it is not what I do. She says, oh, I know that. It's not, but that doesn't have anything to do with with the possibility that is what God wants you to do. And I dare you to ask him. And I did. And I was stunned because almost in that moment, it was clear to me what I was supposed to write about and even the title of the book. That's hard to ignore, Tim.
Oh, no kidding.
But I thought it would be one and done. And I'd continue to work.
Right.
Because I wrote most of that book in airports and hotels when I was traveling for my job.
Yeah.
But there was another one that appeared immediately, and it just continued to happen. And so I did that for about 5 years, balancing both. And I've been writing full time for the last 5, which is a gift. Oh
my gosh, that's phenomenal. Well, and you've got some interesting books that we're going to take a look at here too shortly. Before we get to that, though, I do want to ask a little bit, you began to write then at about age 55, is that right?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Okay. But it was also a rather traumatic time in your life, if I understand correctly, was it? Or just challenging?
It was a time of transition.
Okay.
We had moved from California to Texas. Okay. I lost my brother not long after that. My folks had already gone on before him. Yeah. No major trauma, but if you've lived in one place pretty much your whole life, it was a little overwhelming to get used to it. We knew we were supposed to be there. Yeah. But it came at a challenging time. I'll put it that way. I'm not sure traumatic, but challenging. Definitely.
Okay. And you kind of fought that desire to write?
I did.
Or the calling to write.
The calling to write, yeah. If you're not called, you shouldn't do it. It's just too hard. Yeah. I just didn't see myself as an author. Mm-hmm. And it was how God saw me. And when people say to me, oh, aren't you sad you didn't start 25 years ago? No. Right. Because so much of what he's asked me to write about, I needed to have those 25 years of experience as a wife, as a parent, as hopefully a mature Christian. Yeah. It just doesn't work for what I was writing. I wasn't writing fiction at that time. Right. But there's a great quote by William Kinzer who says, if writing feels like it's hard work, it's because it's hard work. And I'm grateful to say that for me, I hit rough patches, but for me, it's like, I can't even explain it. I'm grateful beyond words that he's asked me to do this because it's what he prepared me for all this time.
Well put. So I know you developed a website called My Purpose Now. Tell me a little bit about how that came to be and what that was all about?
Well, it was sort of my first dip of the toe into the water. Mm-hmm. I had hit middle age and was aware that there were so many women my age lamenting that, well, my kids are grown and I guess that was what God had me to do. And now I don't really know what to do with myself. And they're all signing up for the rocking chair brigade. And I just thought, that is not me. And along with a handful of other women, mm-hmm. each of us who had kind of a specific area. I covered marriage and family. Right. Is someone who covered being single at that time of your life. Another one who talked really about grandparenting and the opportunities. A fourth one that said there are so many things that you're not even qualified to do until you've hit midstream. Mm-hmm. And we wrote a monthly blog, and it was very successful. And when that happened, it really did, I think, inspire me to say, I can do this. Yeah. I can do this. If God will lead me there, I can do this.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you didn't do it alone, right? You worked with a group of some other women too to kind of develop some of that content?
Yes. Writing is a solitary event when you're sitting at the computer, but you have to have come alongside buddies, people who love you enough to tell you when the work's wonderful and when it needs some help. Right. And I belong with a group that came together about 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And you described me as candid but kind as someone who works with authors. Yeah. And I was the most experienced person in that group. None of them had ever published before except me. Right. I'm happy to say that today, 7 of the 9 of us have published.
Wow.
That's a big
fantastic.
Deal. Yeah.
That is. Oh my gosh. Wow. And I assume all Christian-based books?
All Christian women. And, there's always critique groups out there. Sure. The word critique just even sounds difficult to me for some reason. It has sharp edges or something. Right. We don't do critique. We provide feedback. Nice. And so many younger or newer authors sign up for critique groups and they go home in shreds. Yeah. It's the work's not good. They don't tell you what's wrong with it or how to fix it because they're not invested in it, which is why, in addition to that group of 9, I'm part of a group called 4 Sisters Mastermind, and we meet once a month. And we're all at about the same level of writing, been writing this at the same time. Different themes, Bible studies and devotionals and fiction and dystopian fiction and nonfiction. Right. But these are people that I've known for a long time, and we trust one another completely. And if they say, Deb, this is just not working, I'm glad for it. I need to know. But they also say, here are a couple of suggestions. Because just to be thrown in the pit without any hope of digging out, that's just not a way to write.
No, definitely not. Just sounds depressing.
Yeah, it is.
Today, my guest is Deb DeArmond, author and writer. So let's start talking about some of your books.
All right.
Yeah, you've written 6, I believe. So, and most of these are focused on the topics of family and marriage. Tell me a little bit about why those topics in particular. Obviously, that's part of your experience. And was that kind of the main reason, or were you just drawn or felt called to write about those areas for any particular reason?
Well, I told you that as soon as I asked the Lord if that was the call he had on my life, I knew what the topic and the title were. I have 3 sons who married all of the right women. Okay. And for years, people would say to us, to the girls, to me, I don't understand how you do this because you're not just friendly, you're family. And I want to know how you did that.
Nice.
And when I sat down with the girls after a conference that all 3 of us had attended, I said, what do we do that's different? And they looked at me and said, all that stuff that you used to teach people in business about communication and conflict, well, we've picked all that up. And we just, there's a real nice sort of collaboration in the group. We all kind of work together to make things work in the family. Right. And that was a surprise to me. I have a good relationship with my mother-in-law, but it's just not common, Tim. Right. Think about, go back to Lucille Ball and Desi's mom. And everybody loves Raymond. It's the joke, and guess who's usually at the butt of the end? It's the mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law, right.
But I got to tell you, there's as many difficult daughters-in-law out there. When you have a son, you know, what's the old sage, a son's a son till he takes a wife, but a daughter's a daughter all of her life. That means that holidays will be spent with the daughter's family.
Yes.
And that doesn't work for me. I just have boys.
Right.
And one of the gifts that came out of this is that we're really good friends with my son's in-laws. We've become family with them. We've traveled with them.
Yeah.
And so that's how that first got started. Well, going down the marriage and relationship piece, the next book was fun to write because it was a short write. It was I Choose You Today, 31 Ways to Make Love Last.
Yeah.
I choose you today is something my husband began saying to me in the first or second year we were married. One morning while we were making the bed and we're on opposite sides of the quilt, he looked at me and said, I choose you today, baby. And I said, great, what am I being chosen for? He said, I just choose you. And then it got more specific. I choose to serve you today. I know that you've got a lot going on. Let me make dinner tonight. And I began to follow his lead. And when I shared that idea with somebody said, well, what kinds of things do you choose? And I started to go through I choose to forgive you. I choose to support you in what you do. I choose to love you even when it's not easy.
Right.
And guess what? I came out with 31 of those when we made the list together, he and I. And I thought, that's a book.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit about each of those. I talked to tons of couples who shared their stories with me. Mm-hmm. Because if marriage works, it's a choice.
Yes.
There are easy days and then there are not easy days. And you know that too.
Yes.
And so do your listeners. And if we're not purposeful, it can slide off.
Right.
And you find yourself in big trouble without even realizing it.
Oh, so true. Intentional, being intentional.
That's it.
And
so that's the word.
Putting Christ at the center of marriage and family. Well put. So that was your second book, right?
Second.
So let's talk about your first book, Related by Chance, Family by Choice. Tell me a little bit about that, how that came, because that was your first book.
It was the first. It was the one that was birthed because people asked routinely, myself and the girls, how do you do this? We were all in attendance at a conference, and a woman sat across from me one evening at dinner. And she looked down. I was focused on my Salisbury steak, and she was looking down, and she looking at me and said, I want to know your secret. And I looked up, and it was a face I didn't know. Yeah. And I thought, I don't have a secret, and I wouldn't tell you one if I had it. I don't know you. And I said, are you talking to me? And she said, yes, I want to know your secret. And I said, I'm not sure what you mean. She said, I'm in a bunkhouse with your 3 daughters-in-law, and they don't like you one bit. They're crazy about you, and I want to know how you did that. And so after dinner, we sat and spoke, and she told me about all the terrible things that her daughter-in-law was and all of the things that she wasn't. And I said, wow, that's quite a list. And she goes, well, it's nothing I haven't already told her. I said, are you asking for my insight? And she said, yes. I said, well, I think you ought to start by apologizing. And she said, asking to forgiveness from her. I said, well, I'd start with God and then I'd go with her. Because part of the story, Tim, was this was a young woman who had no mother in her life and was passed around to foster care. And here God put a godly woman in her path, and this was her choice. Yeah. Wow. And when we spoke about it, the girls and I, we all agreed that they knew people who were young women who were in that same place. Yeah. I married an only son, but my mother-in-law always supported what we chose. Now, she might have had to do it with gritted teeth, I don't know, but she never lodged a complaint or offered an unsolicited advice. Yeah. And that's hard for moms to do. But if we don't, we will not only destroy the relationship with those daughters-in-law, and sometimes the daughter-in-law is the one with the problem who comes after the mother-in-law. Sure. It divides the family. Yeah. And people will line up. Well, I'm supporting her because I'm married to this one. Or they play the man in the middle. Mm-hmm. Because to their mom, they say, well, mom, she's difficult. And they tell their wives, she's difficult. Just ignore her, babe. But to their mothers, they say, look, my wife she's not very mature. And so there's no real reason for either of those women because they feel like they were in the right. Yeah. The more I learned about it, the more I knew we need to find out what God's opinion is. When the word says that God brought a man to Adam, or brought a woman to Adam in the garden, it wasn't his mother. It was his wife. I think that kind of is the open and shut case for where that's supposed to land.
Well, you bring up some great points, and the family dynamic is changing so much. I mean, just in quote unquote modern times here, but then also in the wake of the pandemics, where there has been so much isolation and backbiting and division going on now. Boy, your book is timely even now.
I'll tell you, it's the bestseller of the 6. Now, it's been around the longest.
Sure.
But I had so many women. I had a woman who actually reached out to me just after the first of this year. Mm-hmm. She said, I think you saved our family because I thought my daughter-in-law was the dark woman. Yeah. And it turns out it's me. And she asked for permission to build a Bible study around that book. And I said, wow. Well, if you'll let me help you with it. And so we've piloted it, and she's teaching it in Oklahoma.
Wow, fantastic. Right there. There's a testimony to the power of writing and to following your calling.
Yep. All
right, so your third book is Don't Go to Bed Angry, Stay Up and Fight?
That's the one.
I love that title, by the way.
Do you know, I wish I could take credit for it, but there's an old actress, comedian, Phyllis Diller.
I remember Phyllis Diller.
And she used to talk about her husband, Fang. Your younger listeners will have no clue what we're talking about.
No, look it up.
But she used to, that's where I heard it. She was on stage and she said, don't go to bed angry, stay up and fight. And it was hysterical, but it was so true.
I love that. So did that come out of, obviously your personal experience, and how did you use that as an impetus to then kind of launch off into some spiritual guidance?
Well, I'd be less than candid if I didn't say that Ron and I had our fair share of intense moments of fellowship.
Sure.
Okay. They happened.
Right.
We were raised in very different kinds of environments. He had three brothers and 2 sisters, and I was a single child. I was the tall adult in my house.
Right.
But it's an awareness that differences aren't bad. They're just different. Yeah. And if we can learn to understand and appreciate, me by myself, I've said so many times to people, I don't know how to adult without Ron because we learned on one another.
Yeah.
And it would be such a boring place. God did not make us to be all identical, to think the same way, to see things the same way. And if it's always got to be one person's way or the other, you're going to miss out on so much of what he has for you. I never thought I'd find myself in ministry. I was a business person.
Right.
But there was such a distinct call on Ron's life early, and it left me open to a very different world than I had expected to be living in, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So there's right ways to do it, and there's wrong ways to do it. Conflict's not bad. It's how we deal with conflict that can be devastatingly disruptive and destroy a marriage. Every once in a while, I'll run into somebody, I'll bet you have too, that says, oh, we don't have conflict. Well, A, they're either lying, or B, one person has such a strong personality, they've overpowered the other, and the other has simply given up and given in. Yeah. That's not a relationship I want to be part of. Yeah. And so to learn how to do that constructively, this is the book that he and I wrote together because I needed his perspective in this book. They had to be compatible. Right. They're not alike. We couldn't be less alike, but it works. Yeah. Because I honor who God's called him to be, and he offers the same. Do we ever have to come back together and go, we got to forgive one another, or we got to ask him? You bet we do.
Sure.
Because we're human.
Right.
But I wouldn't have it any other way. A marriage that doesn't have some differences, it's flat, it's unimaginative. I wouldn't want that one.
Yeah. Well, then from a creative and a writing standpoint, what was it like you two collaborating together on the project?
Well, do you know, it's interesting because we both remember our lives just crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was we didn't remember them identically. And there was this one instance where we couldn't both sit with hands on the keyboard. So we would make notes, we would have conversations. I'd sit down at the keyboard, then I'd bring him in and we'd do a read through and make the changes we needed. And in the middle of one of those changes that I went, that's not how that happened. He started searching in my drawers and I said, what are you looking for? He said, a red pen. I said, why do you need a red pen? It's fine the way it is. And he said, no. He said, I got to write this down. He said, here we are we're conflicting while talking about conflict and we're both laughing through it. And it just seems so ridiculous. And so I'm not really sure how that paragraph or that section ended up, but it came to a place of peace and that's what we sought.
Well, probably no better statement to come out of a book like that.
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
That. That's fantastic. Book number 4, which another kind of humorous title, Bumper Sticker Beatitudes. This was published in 2019? 2019. So how did that come about? And that sounds like a little bit of a departure from,
it is.
From your other book.
I was ready to be out of the marriage column for a while, to be honest with you. The truth is that a friend of mine posted 2 cars parked in a parking lot. She had gone into a store or someplace, right. And they were side by side, and they each had a bumper sticker on the back bumper. And she posted them on Facebook. One said, don't believe everything you think. Mm-hmm. And the other one said, the truth will set you free, but first it'll tick you off. Well, you know that when you're looking for story, yes. You're always looking for a hook.
Right.
So I wrote a blog about faith on each of those 2, and people started sending me their doggone bumper stickers. And within a year, I probably had 300 of them.
Wow.
And a friend of mine, a longtime friend, who had been a crack editor, she was the person you wanted on your work. She let me know that she had just purchased the company she'd been working for, Elk Lake Publishing. And we met up at a conference. She had made an appointment with me, and she said, I want you to write something for me. I said, I don't have anything right now. She said, I know you. You have titles for books that you'll never live long enough to write. And she remembered something about reading bumper sticker Beatitudes, probably on my blog post.
Right.
Write that. And so I did. And it just became more and more fun. And the more I wrote, the more people said, oh, I've got one for you. There could be 3 volumes, but I'm probably done with this one.
Yeah.
But it's just, the truth is, you'll find the word, you'll find principles of godly living anywhere, even on the back of a car.
Right.
Did God put that one there in front of you while you sat on the interstate for 20 minutes while they cleared that accident? Maybe. I don't know.
Right.
I just know that it resonated with so many people. And they were short chapters, so it was fun to write and easy to write. I look forward to it every single time. It was like, which one am I going to choose today? There wasn't a defined order. But it found an audience. And my son, who is a creative, he created the cover for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which was fun.
I love it with the license plate.
Yep.
There. Oh,
it says Deborah DeArmond on it.
I love it. How cool. Well, and it is fun that it's different from the others and lighthearted. And
it surprised people. People said, I didn't know you were that funny. And I said, I didn't either.
And opened you up to probably a new audience a little bit too.
Do you know, it probably did, because I would say that the vast majority of the women who read the books on marriage, or the people who read books, are women. Yeah. They may share them with their spouse, right. But this did broaden that up a little bit. My son said that as he was working on this, he'd read through a few just to kind of get the flavor of it and everything. And he said, wow, you can really write. I said, don't sound so surprised.
Yeah, thanks, son.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at your next book. We May Be Done, But We're Not Finished.
Yeah.
Which is an award-winning book, too.
It is. And I'll tell you that Don't Go to Bed Angry was also an award winner.
It was?
It was.
I did not realize that. Well, what award did that one win?
Same one.
Okay.
First place in the Selah Awards, which are probably one of the largest Christian writers' conferences that takes place every year. Mm-hmm. And it's a real honor to find yourself in in that group. I'd won some lesser prizes for some of the other work, but those two Selahs were well fought, and I was just thankful for God to put that kind of work entrusted to me.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations
Thank
on
you.
both those awards. Well, how did this book come about?
Well, it kind of ties back to that concept about my kids are raised, they're grown. I feel kind of at loose ends. I don't really know what I want to do, but I'm only 54. I'm only 50. I don't feel like I'm ready for the nursing home yet. Thank you very much. But women, especially women who had raised a good number of children, they just felt lost. It was their purpose. They did the carpool and they did the Little League, snack mom, and their lives were built around their children.
Right.
And now they were at loose ends. Lots of them, that was their career. They were homemakers and they raised their children. But even people who had been in business were beginning to say, it was fun for a lot of years, but it's just not something I enjoy doing anymore. But I got to stick it out for, another 3 or 4 years for retirement. This book was the subtitle on this book. It does not appear on the front, but it's Making the Rest of Your Life the Best of Your Life.
The best of your life. I love that.
And you think about what you've learned, some of it the hard way.
Yeah.
Some of it through education or through church or schooling that you've done. You've learned some stuff that might be of value to other people. Mm-hmm. You might have decided that you stuck out that job because it was great benefits and there was really good pay, but you never loved it and you've always wanted to do this thing over here. Go back to school, change careers, become a missionary. I mean, I was stunned by the stories, and it was also an opportunity to pay it forward because I had had so many wonderful people invest in helping me become a writer. Yeah. This book is written, 50% of the chapters are mine, and the other half come from 22 women that I solicited, that sounds dangerous, on Facebook. Right. Told them I was looking for those who had been writers but had never become published authors. Told them what the parameters were, and that they needed to send me, a piece of work that was X number of words by such and such a date. I was looking for 20. I ended up with 22, but I had more than 80 who submitted. Wow. And I was absolutely overwhelmed. A woman in her 70s who went back to finish a degree in divinity and is working in ministry full-time and traveling. People who lost a spouse very, very young, in their 50s, and had to kind of recreate or rebuild what they thought their life would look like. Yeah. People who said, I think I want to travel, and they've sold their home and they're just kind of nomading around the world. There's so much that we've learned, and there's a lot of people that could benefit from some of what we know, what we learned the hard way, what we gained by experience. Right. And it gave these women their first professional writing notation. When it won, there were probably at that conference 15 of the women who had been contributors. It was they just went crazy. It was a little embarrassing, but it was fun. Yeah. And when the nominations initially came in, I said, "Well, it turns out y'all can write after all." And so that's been fun. I've stayed in touch with several of them, and have done some coaching with some of them and watched them grow and continue to go on. Wonderful. The stories are inspirational. I really and truly, I think the oldest participant in the set was 74, and the youngest was just 51. So it's a good span. Fantastic. I have not read that one, and I really want to read that one because that one just kind of tugs at some interest for me too, I guess, because I interview people for a living, and so I'm really curious about the stories on that one. So I look forward to cracking that one open post-interview here. Today, my guest is Deb DeArmond, writing coach and author. Next book is called The Right Calling, Encouragement for the Writer's Heart, and it came out this year. It did. 2022. How did this book come about? Well, it came about after having been a writer for a long time and knowing that encouragement is an essential daily vitamin. I told you a little bit about the writing tribe, Living Right, Texas, the 9 of us. And
And a quick question about that.
Sure.
Did that kind of, forming that group of women, did that kind of come out of when you did the Purpose website? Was there this idea of kind of collecting together women?
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
I had been at a writers' conference, and there were 2 Texan gals that I met,
Right.
Texas gals. And the conference was in Tennessee, and we just kind of clicked, and you're always looking for people who might, be near you.
Right.
And the 3 of us are very, very different, and neither of them had published yet.
Yeah.
And we decided that we'd get together for lunch within a month or so after that conference. And one of the girls was lamenting the fact that there were very few writers groups left in the area.
Mm-hmm.
One lives in Houston, the other one lives near Fort Worth, and I live in the Dallas area.
Yeah.
And I said, yep, they've pretty much gone with the wind. I'm not really sure why. And one of the girls said, we could start one. I said, well, yeah, I guess we could. And the other one said, well, you know how. And I said, yes. And she said, what do you think? I said, not by myself.
Right, yeah.
And so the 3 of us then each invited 3 more people.
Nice.
And none of us knew all of us the very first time we met. And we had rented a VRBO house, and we were going to be sleeping in the same room as these strangers. But it has we have a musician who writes music and books. We have a children's book writer. We have several fiction writers, nonfiction writers. That blend, I benefit from learning about the melody that words can be from the songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And she can learn, from some of the other folks that are there. So it's in its 4th year.
Wow.
And we've had a couple people come and go. Lives change.
Right.
But it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And so that's how that came together. I think all of the gals are native Texans except myself and the girl who's from England. And she's gobsmacked to be included. I never knew what that meant. I was afraid to ask her for a while. But we have very different personalities, very different writing styles, and it's become our strength because we've learned from one another.
Right.
And anybody who writes and sticks with it, because if you're called, you can't just go, I think I'll try watercolors. If you're called, you don't get off the hook.
Mm-mm.
And there's a lot of things to discourage you. The industry has changed dramatically in the 9 years, 10 years that I've been writing.
Right.
It's harder today to get in than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And when you think it's good and then you print it out on that printer and you look at it and you think, where's a match? I'm going to start a dumpster fire. It's no good at all. You need somebody to talk you off the ledge.
Yeah.
And so we began talking about writing a book together fairly early in our time, but not until about mid-2021, did we say either we're going to do it or we're going to move forward. We're not going to just keep talking about it. And it was a labor of love, but it was a labor because I was the person who managed all of the editing. Now, thank you, Jesus. He sent me a great proofwriter and a first-level editor, and I did all the final editing on 46 chapters with 3 rounds of edits.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's wonderful because there are some topics that are the same that the Lord gave totally different solutions to, led them in different paths. And people have started saying to us, okay, so do you guys meet someplace where we could all get together? We've decided to keep it small, but we have said we're happy to help somebody else who wants to start a group of their own figure out how we did it. Because we made some really good decisions and some that didn't always work out in the way that we work together. We only get together physically 3 times a year, from a Friday evening to a Sunday noon. We try to go to conference seasons together. That's always fun to be able to do. And we can always pick up the phone and say, hey, I need some brainstorming, or hey, I need somebody to do a quick read through before I submit this article. Yeah. And it's been one of the best possible things, I think, that has occurred to me since I've been writing.
So you've got this great little support group and encouragement for each other, and that just sounds awesome.
We're really invested in one another's work. And, I don't want to say anything bad about my gender, but women can be very, very competitive and kind of not very nice to one another in the moment. Sure. That's what goes on in those critique groups. I'm going to make myself feel better about my work by making yours look worse.
Right.
There's none of that here. Good. Each of us trust one another, which is why this small size group is so critical.
Yeah.
Nobody's trying to elbow me out. Nobody's trying to take me down a peg. Nobody's falsifying something that needs to be fixed or improved, because we care about the outcome, because we know we're not just writing for fun, we're writing for the Lord.
Yes. Amen. See, that shared purpose in Christ, so important. So you wrote 6 chapters, I believe, in The Right Calling.
Yep.
And each one kind of focuses on a different theme or encouragement for the writer. I mean, the whole book is designed that way. Whether it's humility, writing what you know, ministry, or the team aspect of writing. I know those are some of the areas you wrote about. Yep. And just looking at some of these, I read all your chapters and a number of other ones too. I know this one wasn't yours, but I love the opening one where she references the Velveteen Rabbit.
Yes.
Yes. I just started the book up on a great starting note. But then your first one was humble pie does a body good.
Yes.
And I have to ask you, there's a great line in there. You wrote, creativity also inspires hope. And I just love that line.
Well, given that you are working with creatives and you are one yourself, aren't there moments when you've just thought this project is dead on arrival?
Yeah.
And somebody will say, no, it's not. Look at this and look at this. Mm-hmm. That works. This was the premise. You haven't strayed from that. You've just gotten lost in the process.
Right, yeah.
And it's easy to do.
Yes. Oh, so true. It's nice to know that there's hope in so many ways of life.
Yes, you're right.
And then be yourself. Everyone else is already taken.
That's one of mine.
About knowing your voice as an author. And for other creatives out there and writers struggling to find their voice, do you have some words of wisdom about that area?
Yeah. I think that one grew for me because when you recognize that you always have a partner in the process, capital G, God,
right.
And that if you're called, then you're never alone, number one.
Right.
But sometimes just finding the creative hook for that particular piece, whether it's music or a film or a book, whatever it might be, it's so tempting to say, well, you know what? I really enjoyed that book, or I really like that author. I really like that musician. And I think I could almost pattern myself. God wants the imprint that he put on us the day he formed us in our mother's womb. Mm-hmm. And I think for writers, because there's such a plethora of books, that it's easy. When I work with a new client and we're trying to figure out if this is a good fit, right. I always say, tell me a little bit about your voice. Oh, well, I love this author, so-and-so. And I'd love to be able to come across like she does in you. And I'm thinking, well, that's her. That's not you. Right. And often it's difficult for people to find that place. I'll tell you, I know when I've hit it, when people say to me, people who know me, I could so hear you say that after having read something, because then I know I hooked it.
Right.
I'm not flowery, but I love words. And it's like nails on a chalkboard. If somebody misuses a word, it makes me crazy. My husband always says, you just correct the grammar and go, that required a comma. And it's not the best side of who I am, but it is part of who I am, how I think. But God created you and I and all of the rest of the people here to be unique. Our fingerprints tell us that. Right. Well, so does that voice. How do we say what we're going to say? How do we deliver that message? Don't be somebody else, because you'll never do it as well as they will, because the best possible you is the authentic you. Yeah. Be that person.
Oh, perfect. Beautiful. I love that. And finding out who we are means staying connected to God. Yep. Staying, embedded in his word. And it's through that connection to God that we find ourselves.
Absolutely.
And our voice even clearer. We can hear it clearer, I
yes.
think. Another great one by you, of course, is my new favorite, which great line in there as well. I got a note. 5-star reviews are great, but ministry is the point.
It is.
And I thought that was very significant.
It was a 3-star review.
Yeah.
And by someone who didn't know it was a Christian book when she picked it up.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first line in the review was something like, I really liked your book. I wasn't that crazy about all the God stuff, but after a while it didn't bother me anymore. I thought, gotcha. And her story was a sad one, and her marriage was coming to an end. And she said it made me think about some things and made me realize it wasn't all him. And just maybe there's an opportunity that I hadn't seen before. That's the best review ever. Ever.
Yeah. Wow. Again, a testament to the power of writing, being able to touch people in that way.
Yep.
And help them self-reflect on some things too, that maybe before they read that, they couldn't step outside of themselves to see that.
I think that's fairly common,
yeah,
unfortunately.
I think so too. And becoming maybe more common now with the isolated society. I love that one. Also, another one you wrote, writing is a team sport,
yes.
all about that, finding your writing tribe, right?
It is.
What and you've had to do that a few times in your life, and obviously your latest group has been very helpful for you and for each other. But how do others go about finding that writing tribe? What are some suggestions?
They need to go where the candidates are. I met those 2 other women at a writers' conference.
Yeah. Right.
The mastermind group, met them at a conference. There are a couple of really wonderful opportunities. There are lots of conferences. Very few cover this spectrum. There's conferences for fiction writers and conferences for nonfiction writers and dystopian writers. The ones that I love have a wonderful mix. And that's how I found women who were very, very different from me.
Yeah.
That makes all the difference in the world. That's where you find them, but you have to be open. And the very first collaboration I did was with the woman who served as my first coach when I was greener than grass. She was a conference speaker, and we just kind of connected. Mm-hmm. And I prayed about it. I knew I wanted to coach. I had been a coach in business. I knew how it could accelerate the process. Mm-hmm. And when I reached out to her, she said, I have an opening. And she really walked with me through that first book. That opened my eyes, because the truth is we were nothing alike. The problem with working with people who are just like you is they'll agree with everything you say and do. And that's not a good coach. Yes. You need somebody who's willing to help you see the opportunities you're missing. And that's how I like to phrase them. From there, I began attending conferences, and you just begin to click with people, ask questions. So many want to talk about what they're publishing or what they hope to publish. Ask those, tell me about what you write. How did you get there? Mm-hmm. It's kind of the seat that you're sitting in right this minute. Right. And people are drawn to others when they feel like they're of interest to others. Mm-hmm. And there's been some, I told you we had a couple who had come and gone in our group. There was never any conflict. It just didn't work well for them. Right. And they said, I feel so bad. Don't. We love you. Yeah. And we're glad that you have some other opportunities. Our one children's writer, I mean, gosh, she was always kind of on her own. Mm-hmm. So ask questions, be interested in other people, and don't be afraid to say, hey, I'd like to follow up with you after conference with those that you've really kind of clicked with. Would you be open to that? And then just get to know each other. Mm-hmm. It's a great way to do it.
Express an interest and take an interest,
Absolutely.
Show an interest. That's great. Right time, right now, about when God calls you to write. You've kind of shared about that a little bit at the beginning here too. But any added insights you want to share?
No, just to reiterate that God will let you know when it's your turn. And there's a lot of people out there who say to me, I've always wanted to write a book. What they really mean is they want to have written the writing part they're not that interested in right now. And the book has to have meaning and purpose for them personally, or it just becomes a terrible sort of reminder that I'm not succeeding here. Yeah. So don't go early, don't go late. I always say, God's never late, but he misses a lot of opportunities to show up early. He'll let you know when it's your turn, your time, and when you're ready. Because if you're not ready, it's the most horrible task on the planet. And you signed up all by yourself.
It's your fault.
That's right. And you're to blame.
Exactly. Your last one I'm going to bring up in a minute, Accelerate Your Journey Working with a Writing Coach, because I want to get into your role as a writing coach too in a second. Going back to kind of what I asked you at the beginning, but I'm going to see if you have a little different reflection there. Why do you write?
I write because I can't not write. God wakes me up in the middle of the night. I've been accused of coming up with a great title and writing a book to go along with it, and it's almost the truth. After 6 nonfiction books, God had given me a call to write this fiction. And I foolishly believed that because I could write nonfiction, this was going to be a walk in the park. And I was wrong. I got a third of the way through, 36,000 words in a novel, and just hit a wall and set it aside. I did everything I could do to avoid it. And this was the year that God cleared his throat in my ear and said, you write this verse this year and you write nothing before this is done. Where it's in September, I've not done a lot of writing. But it was because I needed to learn how to write fiction. It just hadn't dawned on me.
Yeah.
You have to not only be called, but you have to be willing to learn the craft. And after you've learned the craft, for a lot of writers, they want to be done. But there's the craft of the book business and there's the business of the book business. And that's where the experience that I had picked up all of those years came through. I wasn't afraid to ask for an opportunity. I wasn't afraid to make a pitch. I didn't feel like I was going to be sick because I was going to get to talk to an editor about my work. All of those things have benefited me. And just very recently, God said, when I said, I thought I could do this myself, and he said to me, you were wrong. That was a moment. And so he's led me to a couple of different practices, some tools, some people, and I'm back up and running.
Today, my guest is Deb DeArmond, author. What does your writing process look like?
It depends on the day.
Yeah, and the book, right?
Yes, it does. It's another area I think I was gifted to have worked in business because I'm pretty used to setting goals and timelines for things. For a lot of writers, that's very difficult. When do they write? Well, when I feel inspired, well, then we'd never get anything done because sometimes it's just hard work.
Yeah, true.
Sometimes it's a slog, and it makes it challenging to do. I'm one of those people who's never been without a planner in my life since I was about 15 years old. I plot out my weeks. I know when I'm going to write. I'm gifted with the best brainstormer on the planet, my husband. And if I'm stuck, I will say, okay, help me with this character, or how should this go? I'm fortunate to have that present. But I'm also not going to write 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. Right. And there are just some times when you've really gone at it and you're tired and it feels like an uphill battle. There's still time to do other things. You don't have to be writing. You can be planning some marketing for that piece. You can sketch out what you think your one sheet that you pitch with at conferences, what that might entail. It's still in that arena, but many folks just don't want to be bothered with that kind of stuff. Yeah. They may have the best book on the planet and it'll never find an audience because we don't know about it. Mm-hmm. And in the old days, the publishers for my first 2 books, they hired publicists and they scheduled you for interviews and for speaking opportunities and sent you to focus on the family. Mm-hmm. They don't do that anymore. They give you a list and say, there you go, call those people and see if they would like to have you as a guest. There's none of that exists in the traditional houses any longer. Yeah. And there's so many bad books on the horizon because pay to play is available. It's not always a wrong choice, but it's rarely the right choice.
You're talking about self-publishing, right?
I'm talking about vanity publishing where you pay for it.
Yeah.
I have really talented friend who has won many awards. She's impatient. When the book is done, she wants it to be out. And so she has gone through the training to learn how to go onto Amazon and create the Kindle version, create the download for the book. That's how the publisher that I've been working with this last 3 books do. It's changed the industry dynamically.
Yeah.
But without some either interest or pre-knowledge in some sort of business aspect of the craft, it's going to be very hard. In fact, I had a friend who submitted a book and has found no interest, and it's because she has no platform. Yeah. The book that I pitched, the very first book, the first person who looked at it asked me for a full proposal, and 3 sample chapters, which is what you hope to come out of that initial conversation.
Yeah.
He didn't buy it. I saw him 2 years later, and he said, "Please tell me that book found a home." I said, "It did." He said, "Who published it?" I told him. He said, "Smart." He said, "It passed with flying colors through the first 2 committees that have to review it, and it died in pro forma because you didn't have a big platform." And that's how that works.
Yeah.
So when I coach, we begin very early developing those skills as well, because without it, you'll make copies of it and give it to all your friends and your family and get a big box of books that will someday end up in the trash.
Yeah. I think you're right. So many people get enamored with the idea of attaching that word writer or author to themselves without looking at, as you've mentioned, the work, the effort. Even today, with all the changes, with self-publishing, everything else going on, that you still have to put into it to make it a success, or to at least get it into people's hands.
Absolutely. And, if they can't find it, they won't read it.
Right.
And if it gets buried as a pay-to-play book, and you've invested, there are packages with some companies that are $25,000 and $30,000 to publish your book.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Crazy amount of money there, too.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit more. So we've gotten into writing coaching here. So you're a writing coach and an editor.
Well, I edit my folk stuff. I'm not.
Okay.
I would never edit because I wanted to be an editor. I edit because I'm working with folks and helping them learn how to write well.
Gotcha. Okay. Good distinction there. Well, as a writing coach, what do you enjoy about that? And what do you look for in the people you take on to coach? What are some things that maybe would help others as they consider their writing futures?
Well, the first thing I ask them is, why do you want to write? And because I work with Christian authors, if there's not a strong connection in their work to the word, I'm probably not the right coach for them.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to help them find one.
Right.
And the other piece, frankly, is I'm looking for people who want to make new mistakes. I don't want to see the same things over and over and over again.
Right.
And then they become dependent. Well, Deb will fix that. Well, Deb's not going to fix it for too long. And a publishing house is not going to buy it if it's not really well written. Writing's not a problem. Writing well is the challenge. And people have to be dedicated. They have to be willing to say, I will invest X amount of time each week into what we're doing together. Most of my clients I meet with twice a month, and they send me their work that they've completed during that time. I go through and redline it. Then we get on the phone and talk about it. And it's important for them not to know just what they didn't do correctly, but why the other way is the correct way. Because if you know why, it's easy to make that your pattern. So I'm looking for people who are eager to learn, who are dedicated to the craft, and who love Jesus like I do.
Yeah. How is your faith a part of your writing and your writing process? I mean, we've talked about some specific areas, but in general, kind of, how does your faith influence your writing?
Without it, I'm not a writer, because I really do believe that the word is the most powerful tool, weapon when necessary, inspiration. That's the life that I want to live, and it's the life I want to help other people either discover, return to, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I know that there are a lot of friends who've written books that are secular in design.
Sure.
Books on craft. Well, that's a book on craft, and it's filled with the Word of God because we wrote it specifically for Christian writers.
Yeah.
There would have been publishing houses that would say, well, that's too narrow. I'm blessed to work with a wonderful house, and I will write for her as long as she'll publish me. Yeah. She's also solicited my husband on a book, so that's going to be interesting.
That's cool.
Because to me, it's a calling. If it's not a calling from the Lord, I would have given up long ago.
Yeah.
But when you know this is what I created you to do, this is your ministry, you have to find that center point that just says, I can't stray. And if you look at the books themselves, every one of the basic premises of the book has to do with the Word of God. It has to do with His instructions to us, His encouragements to us. I'm one person. I might be able to encourage half a dozen in a room if I was really working at it. But His Word it just pops it open for people. Yeah. Like the gal who said, I didn't like all the God stuff necessarily, but it hit her.
Yeah.
It hit her. That's why I like that review best.
I can see why. That's powerful right there. What kind of joys do you get out of being able to help others in their writing craft? Since you've started with people encouraging you, and now, in a way, you've come around somewhat full circle. Now you're able to encourage others in their writing.
I said to someone today, it's like watching your kids grow up and do well. And they're not all kids. Lots of them have years on me. It's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. I've been coaching for 2.5 years and started with, I wanted to start small. I didn't want to take too big of a bite, but 6 is my maximum. I won't take more than 6. And of my current 6, 3 have either signed offers or they're pending.
Fantastic.
That to me, and what's fun is that they always say, you're the first person I let know, even before my husband because he's not home from work or whatever.
Oh, cool.
And I feel like a proud parent.
Yes.
And all I've done is guide them, inform them, cheer them on. They did all the work. It's a great gig. I get to be the cheerleader. Yes. And sometimes the one who scrapes them up off the floor if it's been a bad time. But yeah, it's the most fun I've ever had in my life and gotten paid to do it.
Fantastic. That's exciting. Anytime you can take something that God has blessed in your life and then be able to in turn help others in that way. Wow. Powerful. You know God is working through you.
Absolutely.
And clearly He is through you, Deb. Biggest takeaway that you've learned from being a writer all these years that you could share with others?
Don't start unless you plan to finish. If you believe God's called you, you can't walk away from that and not have some disruption in the force. Always feeling like you've failed, always feeling like you've let God down. We've all had those moments in our life.
Right.
If you know from the outset that this is something that you're dedicated to and committed to, He's never failed me. I have had places where I've been so stuck in a manuscript and just said, okay, Father, I run out of people to check with. And then my husband always says to me, well, why didn't you ask him first? It's like, well, hello, I was looking for somebody who was a writer. And he goes, really, Deb? That's it. It's just that if you feel in your heart and you know in your spirit, this is what God's asked me to do, then prepare. Right. It's not always going to be fun. Right. There's going to be a lot of times when you're going to need some encouragement, someone to help you see the strengths and not just all the stuff you don't like about the work that you've done. Yeah. Stick with it.
Excellent. Great advice. Plans for the future? New book coming out? I know you just put out The Right Calling, but
put out The Right Calling. The Lord said no other books until the novel is complete.
Right, that's true.
And the novel is called Taking the Long Way Home, and it's about 2 women who are more alike than they would ever have initially known.
Yeah.
A mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law.
Oh, very appropriate.
A young couple who met on overseas mission, had been through some real trauma together. They lost a couple members in a really terrible storm, in a tsunami, in fact.
Yeah.
And they decide that they're going to get married before they leave their post to be with the people that they worked with there. And he does not tell his family, and she has no family. So he comes home with a surprise bride. It goes downhill from there for quite a while,
I imagine.
until there is such an awareness that both of these women have been so wounded in their past.
Yeah.
It makes them protective. It makes them want to be in charge. They want to make, they're dealing with fear, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't wait to see how it ends, because I'm not exactly sure yet.
Well, it sounds absolutely fascinating, and I look forward to reading your first fiction book. I think that would be incredible. How can listeners connect with you? And, of course, where can they find your books?
They can find my books on Amazon. It's the fastest place to find them, in Kindle and in paperback version.
Okay.
And they can always reach me on my website, which is debdearmond.com.
Excellent.
And I do have a newsletter. If they're interested, they can drop me a note, and I'd be happy to send them out. It's quarterly.
Okay.
And just kind of revive that. I had let it kind of sit for a while and knew that it was time to bring it back. People kept saying, when's that next volume coming out? I was like, I don't really have a good answer for you today. Check with me next year. But yeah, that's where they can find me.
It's nice to float a few deadlines, especially when you're under publishing deadlines.
You know, it really is.
Well, Deb, this has been awesome. Your latest book, along with a group of other women, is called The Right Calling, Encouragement for the Writer's Heart. It's a fantastic book. Very encouraging words in it. It's just, if you're a writer, heck, even if you're not a writer, read this. It's just a wonderful little book written by a group of, how many women actually?
9.
9 women, including Deb. And it's just a great little book. Highly encourage you all to check it out, give it a read. It's really wonderful, as well as any of her other books, which I need to get caught up on reading the majority of yet. So I look forward to that. Deb, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks so much for being here, for listening to my show, and then for connecting with me, and to be able to have you on. It's just been a delight.
It has been fun. Thanks so much. And I'm thrilled that I was the first female to sit in this chair.
I am too, because, a final note on that too. My wife brought up the fact that you need to have some women on your show. And I was like, I know, but I'm trying to think of somebody in my immediate circles in my current history that I would utilize for that. And sadly, I couldn't think of anybody. And then lo and behold, your review popped up and this whole process started. Again, I think another way that God kind of works through.
It's a God thing.
Yeah, I think it is, definitely. Deb, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for being on today.
Thank you.
I'm so glad God gave me the opportunity to meet and get to know Deb DeArmond. But I can't get past one word on the cover of her latest book, The Right Calling. It's in the subtitle. Encouragement for a Writer's Heart. That word is not only on the cover, it's a theme threaded throughout the book, in all of the chapters. Deb is an encourager. So is her husband. It's interesting. Her husband encouraged her in her faith when they first met. Now Deb is encouraging others in their marriages, their parenting, their writing, and their faith. It's always interesting how God places people in our lives to help us learn from them and to grow in our faith, so that we might, in turn, do the same for others. I heard someone wise say recently that ministry has always been and will always be about relationships. I believe that. Today's world is filled with plenty of critics. There is not a shortage of people telling you what's wrong with you, what you shouldn't be doing, why you aren't successful or smart enough or good-looking enough or don't have enough faith even. Those people can often be passive-aggressive and like to tell others what to do, how to do it, and why you aren't measuring up. Not too long ago, I got some advice from a very good pastor friend. I told him I wasn't sure where God was leading me to in that particular season of life. He told me, maybe consider that perhaps God isn't leading you to something right now. Perhaps He's leading you away from some things. That gave me some great clarity and a perspective on some of the people and situations that I'd been allowing to park in my life in ways that weren't positive influences anymore on my faith, and were, in fact, becoming negative influences. They were polluting my faith instead of helping me grow in it. So I made some changes. One of the biggest was to focus on people who were not merely religious in their faith, not simply focused on telling others what they were doing wrong, but were focused on growing in their relationship with Jesus. All of my interviews here on Creative Christians are part of that group of people. They all also have another thing in common. You know what it is? They are encouragers, like Deb DeArmond and her husband. Do you have encouragers in your life? Now, I'm not talking about yes men, people who only tell you what you want to hear. We need others to challenge us. Honestly, that's rarely a problem these days. As I said, everyone is a critic. What's much harder to find is encouragers. People who invest in you because they care about you. As Christians, we are supposed to be encouragers. We are commanded to love one another. So surround yourself with people who encourage your creative endeavors. But even more importantly, surround yourself with people who encourage you in your faith. People who encourage you in the most important relationship of all, the one between you and Jesus, the ultimate encourager. God wants you to be the best Christian creative you can be. He expects excellence from us through faith in Christ. What better way to do that than to put forth our very best to Him and go about encouraging others to do the same, just like Deb DeArmond. Truly, one of the creative Christians. That'll do it for this episode of Creative Christians. My guest today has been Deb DeArmond. Thanks for listening. Go to Apple Podcasts or whatever your favorite podcast distributor is, and be sure to subscribe to catch each and every new episode. I'd really appreciate it if after listening you'd take a moment to rate the show. It helps me to gauge feedback and in rankings for the show. If you're really feeling generous, I'd love it if you left a brief written review as well. Let me and others know what you like about Creative Christians. You can also email directly with your feedback, comments, or questions at tim@timristow.com. That's tim@timristow.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Tim Ristow. Until next time, stay creative and stay in God's Word. Blessings. Creative Christians is produced by yours truly, Tim Ristow. Special thanks to my guest today, Deborah DeArmond, and her husband. Special thanks to The Edge Church in Azle, Texas, and to Pastor Steve Sanford. As always, a shout out to my lovely and supportive wife, Tracy Ristow. Creative Christians is an audio production of Tim Ristow Productions. Visit timristow.com to learn more. That's timristow.com.